Happy spring break, Penn State football fans. I'm Thomas Ryan Carr. I'm here with Sean Fitz. I am in my spring break shirt. This is the one I could find anyway. So we are here with you. No BWI Lives this week, but we didn't want to leave you completely hanging. So Fitz has been gracious enough to record before he leaves a BWI mailbag, special mailbag that we're going to be doing here. This is just going to be your questions from the Blue White Illustrated message board for us to talk about here today. I'll be doing some other stuff that I haven't even prepared yet throughout the week. But here as we sit on spring break, Fitz, thank you for doing this today and appreciate you being here.
Of course. I'm coming to you from the beyond, and hopefully that means that I'm just off this weekend in Florida and I was not grabbed by a gator in the Everglades. But I'm
different beyond. Yeah, let's not do that one.
Yeah, we're crossing our fingers here that doesn't come back to bite me, literally, figuratively, however it might be. No, I hope everyone's having a great break, and I hope especially selfishly that I'm having the best one. So
I think that's fair. I mean, we're all secretly wishing that for ourselves. And I secretly hope you have a better spring break because you're investing much more in it than I am. I'm just going to be here. So
buddy,
I think you have a bigger incentive.
I've been looking at the 40-day weather report for about 50 days now down in Florida. And now I see that State College is supposed to be, I think, 75 on Tuesday. So I'm missing the nice weather to get to nicer weather. I'm not going to lie. I'm really looking forward to that. But at the same time, how does this happen? Not that I want to wish 20 degrees on you, but I kind of wish 20 degrees on you back home.
I'm fine with it. I'm built for 20 degrees. I know that everyone else is going to complain about the cold gray weather, but like this is how it's supposed to go. Before we get on a tangent of the weather and rants and things like that, let's dive in. Let's get to the mailbag, which the people are here to learn more about Penn State football. Well, got a bit of a trigger finger on the intro there. So this one is from Poncho570, one of our regulars here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel, bluewhiteillustrated.com. Asks a great question. How many recruits along the D-line do you see the staff taking as tweeners versus true defensive tackles or true defensive ends? I've been writing quite a bit about how the scheme and the fit from Matt Campbell and from D'Anton Lynn, both men like more physical, larger defensive ends, physically larger. And so some of those guys might grow to defensive tackles, which has happened over the time for these two men. So Fitz, what do you think from a recruiting perspective? How much can you place on that tweener tag versus guys that are clearly defensive ends or clearly edge rushers?
First off, great question. This is going to be broken down several different ways because the first thing to look at is that it is March of 2026, and these guys, 2027 prospects, a lot of them are going to look a lot different in a year, or in December when they sign. So tweener is kind of different because you kind of have that sliding scale right now where you look at a guy like Zamar Tukes in New York, he lists himself at 6'4", 250. We have him listed at 6'4", 235. And you're thinking, okay, that guy's too light to play defensive tackle. He's not. I mean, it's about the frame. It's about how you're going to project him, how you're going to grow into that. And, anywhere between 235 and 250, that could be a 270-pound player in a year. Like that's not a traditional tweener. We've seen guys like that with Yvan Kemajou that we thought, maybe we're in that mold. And I think he was 235 or so. But he's got a different skill set. He's got just massive hands. He's a strong guy, but he's able to hold up there on the edge and stick in the edge. Most of the guys that they're after right now, probably not going to stick on the edge, but also could be a different kind of tweener. We see that twitchy 6'3", 210, 215, and people think that's too light to play defensive end. Eventually he'll get to 245, 250 pounds and he'll be fine. Whereas, a guy like Aiden O'Neal in New Jersey, 6'5", 250, you look at that and you say, okay, this guy pretty clearly going to grow into a defensive tackle. Well, the junior film was really, really much improved for Aiden O'Neal and showed some different skills than you and I saw when he was camping at Penn State last summer. So it's a very gray area when you're in that middle ground. Now, looking at the way Kakamaloe is going after defensive tackles, there's there's pretty stark differences. I mean, the Polynesian effect is certainly real. His top target, Marcus Fakatu, 6'7", 295. Of course, everyone wants him. He's all over the place in terms of top targets everywhere. He is going to visit Penn State at least once, probably twice. And he's got a great relationship with Malloy. But that is top of the board for pretty much everyone, top 100 recruit. David Fuller Run Show from Chicago area, 6'4", 280, your traditional monster defensive tackle type prospect body. He was really lifted up in the rankings a couple of or this week and last week by Rivals in 24/7. So you got traditional there. John Ione in Texas, 6'3", 280. Just these guys that Stanley Montgomery, 6'3", 290. These guys that are traditional body types are still going to be there. And you're still going to have a large contingency of schools that really want those bodies that are essentially ready-made. Now, Penn State went to the portal. They got 325-pounders, 330-pounders this offseason. You probably don't want that as a high school prospect because it tends to not carry over. It tends to not be the guy that you think is going to grow into the 350-pound nose tackle that everybody covets, especially in the NFL. So you've got those traditional guys, but you're gonna find some guys that we probably determined to be tweeners. Luke Starcevic from North Dakota. Carter Blattner is 6'5", 260, which is a perfectly fine defensive tackle size. But I think that there's always that first off the headshot test where the guy looks skinny, and then number two, the guy is a frame that has a ton of room to fill out, and he's just not there yet. Like I said, we're in March 2026. So that's where I'm seeing there. So I think the overlap is there. You saw the previous staff sort of build up their defensive tackles, and sometimes that worked, sometimes it didn't. I tend to shift more ready-made for this staff, but I think you're going to see both, and I think that's the way to go. I mean, you want that baseline athleticism before you want that baseline size or whatever it might be.
So I'm looking at, I love the kind of practical application that you're bringing to the table. And then I'm kind of thinking about how you want to build your team. And you're absolutely right. They want true defensive tackles on the interior. To me, the conversation is about the guys on the edge. And do you need to have specifically speed rushers to fill out your roster? And so I think that the question, while accurate, is more about the tweener, but in the sense of the size of the defensive end. And the tweener actually might be between linebacker and edge over linebacker and tackle. Now, some of those guys will grow into defensive tackles, and they can be athletic, penetrating interior guys that still, by the way, need to be 310 pounds, by the time they're done for this particular defense. But it doesn't have to be the Chop Robinson, Abdul Carter mode of a guy that's like, okay, this is a linebacker for half of the population in college football, but could be an undersized pass rusher. So the thing that I found interesting is talking to Alexander McPherson from the transfer from Colorado.
Yeah, that's why I wore the sweatshirt. Yeah. Perfect.
He's the guy that I thought could get to that 265-pound size where he can play some snaps on the interior. Eziogu, another guy, Ike Eziogu, who can do that stuff. But McPherson was saying he wanted to be 250 for spring football. And I asked, hey, beyond that, where do you think you can land in terms of your what are your aspirations? And he's like, I don't care. The conversation did not interest him whatsoever. So at the moment, you got a guy who's 6'6" and can be 250. And so that's not a tweener. That's a pure outside edge rusher. And so there are elements of being able to use tweeners within this defense, and they've done that quite a bit. I do think that size is going to matter, but the problem is if you recruit too many tweeners, and I would say the answer is one per class. And now if you look at tweeners between linebacker and edge rusher, you can get two, because you don't want to load up on guys that are tweeners and then not have any speed on the outside. And you don't want to load up on tweeners and then have small defensive tackles, because then you're right back to where you were previously with the old staff. So as much as they can, it's more of a traits for the defensive ends.
Right.
That they can play more on the interior, but not that they're going to be full-on 280-pound hybrids that are playing. If Denai Dennis Sutton played up to his size that we thought he might be able to be when he was in high school and played 280 or something like that. That's more of that tweener, the Smith Vilberts of the world. My problem is like Penn State had a couple of those, and how did it work out? Like, how did it work out for those players, and how did it work out for their production on the field? Because they just weren't strong enough against the run, and they didn't have the athleticism to play outside the tackle. So what you're really looking for is the freak athlete that can just be an edge rusher at 280 pounds, and then you can move him wherever you want. And that guy is probably going to, everyone wants him anyway.
Can I wedge in here and say Carl Nassib, 2020 or 2015 National Defensive Player of the Year?
Yeah, exactly.
No, I mean, that's an outlier, and obviously you're looking at that. But yeah, I mean, there's no, we talk about receivers all the time. What's the best height for a receiver? I mean, there's no sort of tried and true method in terms of what's there for defensive ends. But you look at the developmental curve that these guys have when they come in and they're 6'6". You take Carter Meadows last year in the class 2026, 6'6", 225 or something like that. It's going to be a while before he's able to, number one, grow into his body, be able to be coordinated enough to do the things that he needs to do at this level. You can get by at the high school level by just being better and more athletic than offensive tackles, and a lot of guys have done that. But it's going to take a little bit for him to assimilate here at Michigan. A guy like Elijah Reeder is going to be the same way. I mean, you've got that big, long guy that's just kind of like wacky inflatable arm man that's going to eventually fill out into a 260 pounder, 265 pounder. It's just going to take a while to get there. So, like, I think the definition of tweener is tough, but then you have a guy that's in we'll just go with the Chop Robinson, Abdul Carter mode that, and I'm not talking about athleticism. I'm talking about that size, that 6'3", 220 guy that's more compact, that is more ready to go when he gets here. You thought Jalen Harvey might have been that guy. And I think he would have continued to progress in that situation, but you can probably play those guys a little bit earlier. And looking at Penn State's defensive edge targets, there are some of those guys. James Pace is a guy that I love out of DeMatha in 2027, but like Abraham Cisse, 6'5", 220, just a long prospect that's going to, I think, be a really good player, but also it's going to maybe take him a little bit longer than it would take a James Pace or something like that to get in there. So I'm intrigued by the direction that they're going to continue to go here. Because they're going to be all over the map. You mentioned it, like the 5 tech is back. Like this is, Anthony Zettel played that role for a while and then eventually moved inside and was effective in that role. But I think you're going to have to see like an assembly line of those guys that eventually can move down. And some of these guys, I mean, they're bringing in really big linebackers too that can potentially play there. You look on the current roster, a guy like LeVar Arrington II, I think kind of fits this mold where he has a body type that's unique and athleticism that's unique. But at the same time, it's going to take some time. It's going to take some patience. So I'm excited to see what he can do on the edge, but I'm also a little bit hesitant to think that he's going to project as a 2026 impact player because of the work that he needs to do to get there.
Yeah. Last thought I have here is kind of a meta thought about what D'Anton Lynn wants to be, because we've seen 3 different iterations of this defense over 3 different years. And that is the secret sauce here. But zoom out and let's talk about preference, right? So if you're building something of what you want to play, D'Anton Lynn is from this coaching tree that has Mike Macdonald, Seattle Seahawks head coach and Super Bowl champion, Jim Leonard, new Bills defensive coordinator, was with the Broncos before. The multiplicity, the versatility of the front is part of it, but it goes in a couple of different ways. Macdonald wants to play with 4 down linemen and control the line of scrimmage with 4. But at that same time, they are a dominant 4. Like you've seen other teams that want to do that, but they are playing with speed. They're playing upfield. They're playing like a wide 9 where you got those edge rushers, kind of like what Penn State was playing previously here. This is more about control the offensive line with 4 players that are ass kickers up front in the defensive line. Is that his preference of playing? Because that's what it looks like now with the group of players they have here of run stuffers and then some guys that can get to the quarterback. And then you can change the picture based on a couple of different body types. But primarily what you're doing is you got 2 big defensive tackles and some power defensive ends. And then you're winning in a couple of different ways to get to the quarterback. But you don't have the obvious edge rushing Myles Garrett's of the world. Sure, you take that guy in an ideal situation, but you can win pass rushing in the margins because you have done such a good job against the run and such a good job on first down in general. So this can go a couple of different ways. And we're going to see whether or not they have to take tweeners, whether they find tweeners, and then how those guys develop over time determines what the fronts and the mix of these things are going to be. So it's a great question going from the source of what we've seen, especially at USC, which I think was more of like a desperation move of what they did last year, as opposed to what would you prefer to do in an ideal situation?
Yeah, and I'm looking at the USC defensive stats, and stats will not tell the whole story, but you've got 5.5 sacks as your sack leader from a defensive end, then 4.5 from a defensive end, 3.5 from a defensive tackle, 3 from a defensive tackle, 3 from a defensive end, and then 3 from Eric Gentry, who is a linebacker, but like, we're still waiting for Eric. Who's number one? He's probably injured, but we're still waiting to see what his best sort of his best traits are going to be. And I think he might be a better pro than he was a college player, just because he might be more available there, but we'll see. But Nittany led the team in sacks last year. And then the year before, of course, it was Abdul. So like most of your stuff is going to, it's natural, right? It's going to come from defensive ends. That's your rush position. That's why they call them edge rushers, right? Amin was in there. Vanover was in there. But Penn State used its linebackers in 2025 a lot to generate pressure. You had 3 of your top, I think 6 or 7 sack guys last year, including Tony Rojas, who was missing most of the season, like to generate
That's a rough
pressure.
reality.
Yeah, it was. But you look at the scheme, the one gap scheme where they're trying to open things up for the linebackers that included, pass rushing. Now you move to a gap and a half scheme. And I think that's going to open things up for a lot of different people. I don't know that their numbers are going to be great. I'm still a bit bearish on Penn State's defensive line this year, because I don't know what they're going to get from the interior. And I don't know how it's going to work with, guys that can eventually be that third down defensive tackle, the third down, how they can rush the passer and get through there. There's a lot on the table to be worked out for Penn State in 2025 or 2026. But yeah, I think that's going to be probably the most interesting thing looking forward, is how do you take very stark differences between first and second down when you're trying to stop the run with those big mollies in the middle there. And how do you get to the passer on third down? Which kind of matchups present that? And how do you just not get diced like they have been on third downs the last couple of years?
Yeah. That I'm probably on an island here, in that I don't disagree overall about the point, I think, of the upper end of the talent here, but the specificity of Cooper Ebels is a run defending linebacker. He played basically 3 technique at a lot of times during his time at Iowa State. So he's going to be a positive force in run defense. And the interior players I wrote over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Quick reminder for you here to subscribe to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com so you can read some of this stuff. It's just $1 for a week to try us out. Those interior guys, I think there's some positive upward momentum despite their age because of the injuries, especially with Keanu Williams. I wrote about him last week at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, but I absolutely agree. Where's the pressure coming from? There's a lot that needs to be sorted out there. And of course, I'm talking about an injury sort of situation with Keanu Williams coming back off an Achilles, where the projection is he'll be better this year, but we haven't seen since 2023 the guy that was a force as a run stopper in a rotation at UCLA.
And you're looking on the edge, and the guys that they have, I don't want to call them proven pass rushers, but guys that we think would be the pass rushers. Max Granville coming off a major injury. Now they're excited about Max. Max can be that guy, but the reality is he's coming off of an injury. Like, that's going to take some time. And Kemajou, as I mentioned earlier, I think he's going to be a really good player this year. Is he going to be able to finish on that? Because you're looking at the guys they brought over that are probably going to fill out that 2 deep. You mentioned Alexander McPherson, Ike Eziogu, different body types, different sort of playing types. And, usually the twitchier guys typically win. I know De'Anton had the sack total this year, but the twitchier guys are by and large pretty productive when they get in that sort of role. So big questions ahead for that. As a recruiting question morphed into what do we think of the defensive line in 2026? So sorry about that, but there's some bonus content for you within the bonus content.
Yeah. And you know what? It was such a good conversation. What we're going to do is this is going to be like the first part of our series now here on spring break week. We got some more questions coming up. So make sure you stay tuned for more of that this week. Fitz and I are going to have more mailbag questions coming up here at Blue White Illustrated here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. As always, like the video and subscribe. Help us out as we get into spring football coming up at the end of the month, because things are going to start, going. People are going to poke their head out of the, under the blankets as it gets warmer. And we want to make sure that we're full steam ahead. And it's mission critical that you help us out with that to make sure that everyone knows about Blue White Illustrated on the internet once spring football hits. So appreciate that. We'll be back with more mailbag questions in just a bit.